A high-rise building is a tall building, as opposed to a low-rise building, and is defined differently in terms of height depending on the jurisdiction. It is used as a residential, office building, or other functions including hotel, retail, or with multiple purposes combined. Residential high-rise buildings are also known in some varieties of English, such as British English, as tower blocks and may be referred to as MDUs, standing for multi-dwelling unit. A very tall high-rise building is referred to as a skyscraper. High-rise buildings became possible with the invention of the elevator and less expensive, more abundant building materials. The materials used for the structural system of high-rise buildings are reinforced concrete and steel. Most North American-style skyscrapers have a steel frame, while residential blocks are usually constructed of concrete. There is no clear difference between a tower block and a skyscraper. Although a building with 40 or more stories and taller than 150 meters is generally considered a skyscraper, high-rise structures pose particular design challenges for structural and geotechnical engineers, particularly if situated in a seismically active region or if the underlying soils have geotechnical risk factors such as high compressibility or bay mud. They also pose serious challenges to firefighters during emergencies in high-rise structures. New and old building design. Building systems like the building standpipe system, HVAC systems, fire sprinkler system and other things like stairwell and elevator evacuations pose significant problem. Studies are often required to ensure that pedestrian wind comfort and wind danger concerns are addressed. In order to allow less wind exposure, to transmit more daylight to the ground and to appear more slender, many high-rises have a design with setbacks. Apartment buildings have technical and economic advantages in areas of high population density, and have become a distinctive feature of housing accommodation in virtually all densely populated urban areas around the world. In contrast with low-rise and single-family houses, apartment blocks accommodate more inhabitants per unit of area of land and decrease the cost of municipal infrastructure. Various bodies have defined high-rise. High-rise apartment buildings had already appeared in antiquity, the insulae in ancient Rome and several other cities in the Roman Empire, some of which might have reached up to 10 or more stories, one reportedly having 200 stairs. Because of the destruction caused by poorly built high-rise insulae collapsing, several Roman emperors, beginning with Augustus, set limits of 20 to 25 meters for multi-story buildings, but met with limited success, as these limits were often ignored despite the likelihood of taller insulae collapsing. The lower floors were typically occupied by either shops or wealthy families, while the upper stories were rented out to the lower classes. Surviving Oxyrhynchus papyri indicate that 7-story buildings even existed in provincial towns, such as in 3rd century AD Hermopolis in Roman Egypt. In Arab Egypt, the initial capital city of Fustat housed many high-rise residential buildings, some 7 stories tall that could reportedly accommodate hundreds of people. Al-Muqaddasi, in the 10th century, described them as resembling minarets, while Nasir Khusrav, in the early 11th century, described some of them rising up to 14 stories, with roof gardens on the top story complete with ox-drawn water wheels for irrigating them. By the 16th century, Cairo also had high-rise apartment buildings where the 2 lower floors were for commercial and storage purposes and the multiple stories above them were rented out to tenants. The skyline of many important medieval cities was dominated by large numbers of high-rising urban towers, which fulfilled defensive but also representative purposes. The residential towers of Bologna numbered between 80 and 100 at a time, the largest of which still rise to 97.2 meters. In Florence, a law of 1251 decreed that all urban buildings should be reduced to a height of less than 26 meters. The regulation immediately put into effect. Even medium-sized towns such as San Gimignano are known to have featured 72 towers up to 51 meters in height. The Hak people in southern China have adopted communal living structures designed to be easily defensible in the forms of Wailongwu and Tulu. The latter are large, enclosed and fortified earth building, between 3 and 5 stories high and housing up to 80 families. The oldest still standing tulu dates back from the 14th century. High-rises were built in the Yemeni city of Shibam in the 16th century. The houses of Shibam are all made out of mud bricks, but about 500 of them are tower houses, which rise 5 to 16 stories high, with each floor having 1 or 2 apartments. This technique of building was implemented to protect residents from Bedouin attacks. While